Hey, welcome once again to Wednesday night service. So glad that you've joined us. I have a word I want to share with you. It's not going to be long, but I do have an important word I think that all of us can receive from, and it's called staying positive in a negative world. You know, I'm a relatively positive person. Having said that, I find myself often in the sea of negativity. I'm quite sure you do as well. Now, I recognize that some people naturally are more positive than others. Some people naturally are more pessimistic or negative than others. You know the positive people. The cup is half full for them. They are the ones who walk into a room and say, wow, wonderful, isn't this great? Then there's those who look for reasons to be negative and critical. For them, the glass is half empty. The economy is doomed. Can you believe this stuff? Why in the world? It goes on and on and on. The reality is there are a lot of things to be positive about. There are a lot of things to be negative about in our world. And I'm not suggesting in any way that we put our heads in the sand and just pretend nothing is wrong. But God is moving. He's always at work. And there's a lot of good God things that are happening today. So I have a question, and I want to pose this question to you. What kind of bird are you? And I'm only going to give you two options. You're either a buzzard or a hummingbird. Now, a buzzard flies around every day looking for something dead. He's looking for dead things, and we'll find them. A hummingbird, on the other hand, flutters about every day looking for sweet things, and the hummingbird will find them. And it's a biblical principle. In Proverbs chapter 11, verse 27, the Bible says, if you search for good, you're going to find favor. But if you search for evil, it will find you. Bird, what kind are you? Buzzard or a hummingbird? You can always find what you're looking for. You want to find the positive? Look for it, you're going to find it. You want to find the negative? You don't have to look far because it's going to find you. Ever notice it's the same people who are always at the scene of the negative? It just seems like it has a way of finding them. They have a way of being around it. Why? Because the enemy uses their voice. In Proverbs chapter 6, verses 12 through 15, the Bible says this, reading from the Message, riffraff and rascals talk out of both sides of their mouth. They wink at each other. They shuffle their feet. They cross their fingers behind their back. Their perverse minds are always cooking up something nasty, always stirring up trouble. Catastrophe is just around the corner for them, a total smash-up. Their lives ruined beyond repair. Now, for those of you who view the simplicity of the Message Bible with disdain, here's what the interlinear Hebrew, Greek, English Bible calls a negative critical person. It calls it this: one who sends out strife and is not viewed favorably by God. Funny thing is, some here today, you've already decided you don't like this message. You would be those who are more critical. Do not hang up. Do not change the channel. I want to share a word with you today from the Lord. Come on, let's be positive. That's today's message. And I'm going positively after you to affect you in a positive way. All right, we're going to do something maybe a little bit different today. I'm going to take the hose of positivity. I'm going to spray it at you and get you all wet. Let's wash away the negative. There's enough of that in the world. We don't need to add to it as Christians. As believers, we shouldn't be adding to it. So are you ready? Let me hook up the hose. Let's be washed by the water of the word. Ephesians chapter 1, verse 1 says this. Paul, he's writing, and he identifies himself. I am Paul. Here's who I am. I am an apostle of Jesus Christ by the will of God. God made him an apostle. And then he addresses the saints who were in Ephesus. Here's the thing about Paul. Many of you sit here today listening with prevailing negative thoughts about your status, where you are at spiritually, where you're at financially, where you're at in ministry, where you're at in this stage of your life. And many feel small or insignificant. I'm never going to. I never will. I can't. It's not my thing. It's not God's plan. It's not God's will. And we see ourselves in our homes, in our workplaces. We see ourselves in our church as someone who is insignificant or smaller than someone else. And guess what? When Paul identified himself, guess what he was saying? He was saying, most people would look at me as inferior. You want to know why that is? You know what Paul's name means? It means small. It means small. The Apostle Paul wrote the book we're reading out of, Ephesians. He wrote 13 of the 27 books of the New Testament. That's 32% of the New Testament written by Paul. And that doesn't include Hebrews. The book of Hebrews isn't identified by the writer as to who the writer is, but most scholars believe that it was the Apostle Paul. He's an important guy, that's the point. Important to the people of his time. Oh, certainly important to the people of our time. Most importantly, he was important to God. God used him. And what did his name mean? It means small. In Ephesians chapter 3, verse 8, he saw himself that way. Listen to what he says. To me, and I am less than the least of all the saints, this grace was given by God to me that I should preach among the Gentiles the unsearchable riches of Christ. See, Paul knew who he was. He was who he was. He was born where he was born. His stature was what it was, but he allowed the unsearchable grace of God to wash over him and to use him, despite the fact that he viewed himself as the smallest of the small. Listen, the word of the Lord to you is this: you are chosen by God. Paul said, I preach to the Gentiles not because of my stature spiritually, physically. I preach to the Gentiles because God chose me. That's why I preach. Remember, you were chosen. You remember in school when they were choosing teams? Everybody would line up on the playground, and they'd get two captains, and so one would choose their first pick, and then the next one would choose their first pick, and so on and so forth. It was great being picked first. How do I know? Well, personal experience. And it was a bummer being picked last. I don't know that from personal experience. I'm supposed to be laughing right now. But you may know it from personal experience. But here's the good news. Paul was picked by God, chosen by God, and God picked him first. And not only that, but he picked him before the game started. He chose him, the Bible says, from the foundations of the world. You know, before she got enlightened, Joyce had cats. Thankfully, we no longer have them, but she had cats. And you know, cats believe, there's not a whole lot we can learn from cats, but there is something I believe that's appropriate to apply to this lesson today. Cats believe that they are the chosen. They don't believe that they are owned by anyone. They just have staff. If you own a cat, you aren't the owner. You're just the cat's staff, and it's their world. You're just allowed in it. They're confident in their world. Well, we too are chosen. This is our world. God chose us before the foundations of the earth, and our time is now. We must have confidence in that. He said in 1 Corinthians 15:9, I am the least of the apostles. So he knew he was in the natural, but he allowed God to be who God was spiritually, and it elevated Paul into who he was. John chapter 15 verse 16 says this, you did not choose me, but I chose you. God's speaking to you right now. I appointed you so that you might go and bear fruit that will last. And so that whatever you ask in my name, the Father will give it to you. You are chosen by God. I want to end today by going to the story of the prodigal son. The prodigal son teaches us how to live positive in a negative world. And so in Luke chapter 15, beginning at verse 11, now let me just set things up. There are three people in this story. First, there's the father who was a wealthy baron, a wealthy landowner, businessman. Then there was the oldest son. He was self-centered. And then the youngest son. And he was immature. He was the gimme type of personality. And in verse 11 it says there was a certain man and he had two sons. Verse 12, and the younger of them said to his father, Father, give me the portion of goods that falls to me. And so he divided them his livelihood. The father did just that. He took youngest son, took his inheritance and he leaves home. And through a series of events, he winds up squandering his money and basically eating pig slop. I mean, he just was a mess. I want to fast forward all the way to verse 17. And the Bible says, and when he came to himself, he said, how many of my father's hired servants, people that work for my dad, they have food. They have food to eat and food to spare, and I have nothing. I'm dying with hunger here, the Bible says. Saw that what he had done, leaving, squandering all that he had, wasn't such a good idea after all. Then we see the very first valuable lesson on how to live in a positive way in a negative world. And that is this. Number one, take responsibility. Take responsibility. Look at verse 18. I will arise and go to my father, and I will say to him, Father, I have sinned against heaven and before you, and I am no longer worthy to be called your son. Make me like one of your hired servants. I don't even want to be your son. Don't treat me like your son. If I could just be a servant and work for you, and I'll live in the bunkhouse with them, I'll eat what they eat. Just make me one of your hired servants. And verse 20 says, and he got up and he came to his father. And when he was still, as he's moving towards his father, he had determined what he was going to say, what he was going to do. As he walked back on the property, his father saw him from a distance. And the Bible says that the father ran to him with compassion, grabbed him in a big bear hug, and kissed him. That didn't happen and wouldn't have happened unless he took responsibility first. He had a negative situation that he was living in, and yet he took responsibility for it, and he swallowed his pride and came back home to his father and to his home and to his family. We become negative. Negativity is attracted to us when we don't take responsibility for ourselves. When we blame other people as the reason things are the way that they are. Secondly, we focus on what's right, not what's wrong. Let's read in Luke chapter 20, through verse 24. With all that the son had done wrong, he lost his inheritance. Let me read it. And he arose and came to his father. Of course, we read that, and his father ran to him. And the son said, Father, I've sinned against heaven and in your sight, and am no longer worthy to be called your son. But the father said to his servants, bring out the best robe and put it on him, and put a ring on his hand and sandals and his feet, and bring the fatted calf here and kill it, and let us eat and be merry. For this my son was dead and is alive again, and he was lost and is found, and they began to make merry. Focus, which is the second point, on what's right and not what is wrong. With all that the son had done wrong, lost his inheritance, rebelled against his father's house, acted out of immaturity, the father didn't focus on what was wrong. No, he focused on what was right. He ran to him with compassion, hugs and kisses. He called for a party. He didn't say, I can never trust you again. He didn't release everything his son had done wrong or rehearse it. He focused on what was right. Philippians 4 verse 8 says this, finally, brethren, whatever things are true, whatever things are noble, whatever things are just, whatever things are pure, if there's any good report, any virtue, anything that is praiseworthy, meditate on these things. And that's exactly what the father did. He responded, number 3, positively to negative people. The Bible goes on to say his older son was in the field. And he came and drew near to the house. He heard music and dancing because his brother had come home. And he said to the servants, what's going on? And the servants said, your brother's come and he's safe and sound. And your father has killed the best cow we have in the pasture, put it on the grill. We're having a feast. We're having a party. And the brother was angry, negative, and he wouldn't go to the party. And his father said, hey, come on in. And come on in, and we're celebrating. And he said to his father, look, all these years I've been serving you, I never transgressed, I never sinned. I didn't take my inheritance and squander it. I didn't end up in a pig slop. I didn't come back crawling, begging. No, I stayed here and I worked hard. And you never threw a party for me. But as soon as this other son of yours came, who has devoured your livelihood with harlots, you killed the fatted calf for him. And he said to me, now listen to what the father said to his son. Son, you're always with me, and all that I have is yours. It's right that we should make merry and be glad. For your brother was dead, and he's alive again. He was lost and is found. Listen, you can be negative if you want to be, but there's enough positive out there to make things right. Respond positively to negative people. It's okay to be small. Why? Because you're chosen. So take responsibility, focus on what's right, not what's wrong, and respond positively to negative people. Well, that's all I have to share. Remember, this coming Sunday, give somebody a call, invite somebody. Free coffee, free Krispy Kreme donuts. We'll see you then. God bless. Have a great rest of the week. Oh, men, see you Saturday morning, 7:30, right here at the church campus, men's breakfast.